Canada announced $4.3 billion in new support for Ukraine this morning. Prime Minister Mark Carney made the announcement at the G7, standing next to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The pledge of support comes just after Russia's deadliest attack on Ukraine this year.
We need support from our allies, and I'm here, and thank you for the military package. It's important for our soldiers to be strong at the battlefield, to stay strong out until Russia will be ready for the peace negotiations.
Canada's support package includes $2 billion in new military aid with funding for drones, ammunition, and armored vehicles. The disbursement of a $2.3 billion loan to help rebuild infrastructure and public systems, plus a new sanctions package. Zelenskyy is one of the many world leaders gathered in the Rockies. They are meeting as the world faces escalating conflicts on multiple fronts. And to help make sense of it all, three experts in politics and geopolitics are joining me this hour. Vina Nadjibulla is Vice President Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Arif Lalani is a former Canadian ambassador to Jordan, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the United Arab Emirates. And Brian Clow is a former Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who worked a lot on the Canada-US file in particular. It's good to see you all. Brian, I want to start with you if I can. I mean, the military aid and the financial support for Ukraine, not a big surprise to see that come from Prime Minister Mark Carney, but the news we have late today is no joint statement on Ukraine because the U.S. wanted to hold back the language. So there is no communique on that, and Mark Carney is going to use stronger language in his chair statement when he speaks. What do you make of the inability to get consensus on this conflict here?
Well, to a large extent, it's not a surprise because Donald Trump has been clear that he is not aligned with the rest of the G7 when it comes to Ukraine. And he made that clear again yesterday when he chose to, alongside Mark Carney, not agreeing with Mark Carney, but standing next to Mark Carney, he went on and on about why he thought Putin should be at the G7, which I think is a bit absurd. Donald Trump made it clear that he wanted this war to end on day one. He actually told Justin Trudeau that before he took office, that he expected this war to be done on day one. Good if the war can end, but not if it means Ukraine surrenders to Putin's demands.
Yeah, Vina, it's perhaps not a surprise that there's no unanimity when sort of the opening remarks from the president was lamenting the absence of Vladimir Putin, right? I mean, what do you make of this and what it may mean?
I think absolutely. It's not a surprise. And it's good that Prime Minister Carney is moving ahead with a stronger chair statement. I think it was also important for President Zelenskyy to be present at the G7 and to meet with other leaders, including the outreach partners that were invited. I noted that he had discussions also with the Indian Prime Minister. He also had strong discussions with the Japan Prime Minister, who he normally doesn't see because obviously President Zelenskyy interacts quite a bit with NATO leaders. So I think it was important to have democratic solidarity from Japan and others, and for him to be able to make the case to India in particular, who will be meeting with President Putin. Prime Minister Modi will be meeting with Putin in short order.
Arif, what's your sense on this one?
Well, look, I think they did the best they could. Everybody knew that there wouldn't be unanimity, but I think the challenge is coming in a couple of weeks. It's okay for the G7 to do this, but when you go to the NATO alliance meeting, the alliance has to show that it is actually united, and that has to include the United States. So I think they've kind of punted this forward, but there's going to have to be a lot of discussion in the coming weeks to see how it lines up at NATO.
So Arif, like, what kind of work do you need to do between now and when they gather in The Hague for that NATO summit? Because there's a series of international summits coming up over the next couple of weeks in Europe. The NATO is summit's going to be ostensibly about getting a new spending target of 3.5% plus on top of that. I mean, how do you take steps between now and then to try to get the U.S. into in line with everybody else?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways you can do this. I mean, one is kind of the way Prime Minister Carney did it bilaterally on India, which is to take care of a number of issues on their own ahead of the summit. So everybody knows the positions, do what you can separately, and then at the summit, there's I think less to deal with. Or the other way is to have some kind of a much more watered down statement, or you have to have officials working to come to some agreement on what language can be interpreted. Often when we negotiate these things, will walk away saying, well, country X is going to interpret this word in one way and it's okay for us, and country X is going to interpret the same word in a different way. So I think there's some work officials can do to come out with some kind of a unified statement. But as always with, I think, the Trump administration, it's going to be unpredictable even during the meeting.
Well, Brian, you've had experience with Trump 1 and Trump 2 in your various roles in government. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, whether it is even likely that you can get Donald Trump to move into an area where he's in line with the G7 partners and the rest of NATO? Because they are kind of going their own way on this. They have gotten NATO to at least get to the 2% target, but on the actual use of the alliance and the purpose of the alliance, there's still these disagreements.
Yeah, as with many things with Donald Trump, it is a real challenge with the NATO summit coming up. And I think the goal there is the same as the goal at this G7 summit. It is survival, minimize the amount of disagreement, but fully recognizing the prospect of full unity on every issue, particularly Ukraine, Russia, is going to be very difficult with Donald Trump in the room.
Okay, on the 2%, though, we heard from Mark Rutte earlier, and Brian, start with you on this. It was a week or so ago that the Prime Minister, announced the plan to accelerate things getting to 2%. And now the Secretary General says he's pleased with that because for the first time ever, all the members of the alliance at least have a plan to get to that spending floor. But now they want it to go to 3.5. Do you see a path where that's an easy thing for Canada to do?
Well, first off, it was a very big step for Prime Minister Carney to make the announcement he did. I think it's a good thing. And part of the reason he was able to do it is things changed in this country after the president's re-election and the threats against our sovereignty. And a lot more Canadians became supportive of such a big move, such a big expenditure. So getting to 2%, a big deal. Executing on that, it's going to be a challenge in the short term. Beyond that, the Canadians will have to examine any new target that's agreed to. But in the short term, Prime Minister Carney needs to try to get recognition from NATO allies for the big step that he just took.
Vina, what are your thoughts there? I mean, getting it to 2% is $60 billion a year. Getting it to 3.5, you're at $100 billion, plus getting it to 5%, which with the extra things that they wanted to add on, you're talking a whole lot more, right? It's a difficult thing to do, but maybe a necessary thing to do. What are your thoughts on where this may go on the defense spending side?
I think it was absolutely critical for Prime Minister Carney to make the announcement, both in the lead up to this G7 meeting, to be in the room with President Trump and others, and also in the lead up to the NATO summit. So we've made the announcement. There is some creative accounting, moving things around, Coast Guard and such. I think the critical issue is going to be, can we spend on procurement in particular? It's one thing to be able to raise salaries and the things that we can do, but there are a number of issues around the defense industrial base that would need to be addressed for us to be able to sustainably spend 2% and get up to 3.5% over time. And I think it'll be critical not only to do stuff with Europe. I think we said we'll rearm Europe, which is great, but we need to deepen partnerships with Korea and Japan and Australia in particular. And I think that's why it was important to have Prime Minister Albanese and President Lee at this G7 to begin those security and defense conversations with others, because we'll have to partner with them to be able to build the platforms we need, to buy the things that we need, and to spend the money, even if we find ways to sacrifice and allocate up to 3.5% in some future time.
So, Arif, I just wanted to close the loop on this and bring it back to Ukraine. I mean, where do you think President Zelenskyy is as he gets ready to leave this summit? He came here. He never got a meeting with President Trump because, he left to go back to Washington to deal with what's happening between Israel and Iran. And you have this mixed language coming out with a different view on things. I mean, how secure do you think Ukraine should feel at this point based on how things evolved here in Kananaskis?
I think he probably came away with the best that he could. I think President Zelenskyy really needs to count on the Europeans to do the heavy lifting for him with the Americans. And so I think the Europeans really need to lead the way and bring the Americans along. So I think that's a really important point. And I agree also with Vina that I think it's really important for President Zelenskyy to have met some of the other leaders outside of the G7 and outside of NATO to get that support. But like many other countries, you're really kind of seeing a world where the superpower is almost kind of what I call a shrugging superpower. It's kind of observing, it's taking opportunity where it can, but strategy and execution it seems to be very, very unpredictable for everybody.
Okay, while we're speaking, Vina, I'd like to start with you on this. Prime Minister Mark Carney is having his one-on-one with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Our expectation had been just before showtime that this meeting was going to happen later, after the Prime Minister had his press conference. Things are fluid at these summits. It got moved up, it accelerated. They've had their meeting. We're going to get the tape of their initial exchange in just a second. But Vina, what's your sense of what Mark Carney needs from this? We talked in the past on this show about the controversy surrounding inviting the Prime Minister of India, given the transnational repression ongoing in this country. What needs to come out of this for Mark Carney to be able to look at the people he's upset with this and say it was worth it?
I think it's going to be a critical meeting. Obviously, the handshake that happened earlier today will be important in setting the tone for the meeting that's taking place now. Prime Minister Carney would need some kind of a signal that India is willing to cooperate on law enforcement issues. He said that after the phone call that he had with Prime Minister Modi. Now it'll be interesting to see what that cooperation looks like. Is there going to be some kind of an expanded mechanism to deal with this issue? Is there going to be language coming out of the statement, particularly from Prime Minister Modi? Because I think we know for sure that Prime Minister Carney is going to say that these issues of transnational repression and law enforcement in the case of Niger were raised, but what comes out from Prime Minister Modi is going to be critical. But then more broadly, this is just the first step in rebuilding the relationship. You can't remove all grievances with one handshake or one meeting. There's going to be a long road ahead in the lead up to the G20. So these two leaders will have another chance to meet in September at the G20, and I'll be watching to see what happens between now and then at the level of exchange of high commissioners or restarting of trade negotiations to justify the meeting that just took place.
Okay, we'll dive more into that in just a sec, but first I want to show you the clip because Prime Minister Mark Carney, this is him greeting Prime Minister of India Narendra Modi as they met in Kananaskis just a few minutes ago. Let's take a look at that.
Good. May I say, Excellency Prime Minister, it's a great honor to host you at the G7. India has been coming to the G7, I believe, since 2018 in Biarritz. With our French partners, and it's a testament to the importance of your country, to your leadership, and to the importance of the issues that we look to tackle together, from energy security, from the energy transition that you're helping to lead, to the future of artificial intelligence, to the fight that we have against transnational repression, against terrorism, against other factors, and the work that we can do together. And it is my great honor to have you here. I enjoyed your intervention just now, and we look forward to our discussion.
Excellency, thank you for inviting me to attend the G7 summit. And I'm very happy to get this opportunity to come and visit the soil of Canada after 2015 and to be in touch with the people of Canada. India is the largest democracy in the world. During our chair of the G20 summit, we took many initiatives for the welfare of the world. And today, we are extending that resolve through the G7 summit and going to execute it through the help of this platform as well. So I think that this is a great opportunity for us to serve public good, the global goods. It has always been India's intention to promote global goods, and today through G7 we have that same opportunity. I believe that India-Canada relations are extremely important, and India and Canada should work together and achieve win-win cooperation in several areas. Canadian companies have invested in India in a big way. Indian people have also invested in Canada in a big way. We both stand for democratic values. Together, we can strengthen democratic values. We can strengthen humanity. If we work together, optimally utilize all our resources, we can work for the welfare of the entire humanity. And I'm extremely confident that we'll be able to do this task. Excellency, congratulations on a grand victory on this election. And I'm sure under your leadership, we will be able to work together in a positive way and take India-Canada relationship forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, and Prime Minister Mark Carney. That was not an amazing feat of ventriloquism by the Prime Minister of India. That was his interpreter speaking just off screen, translating Narendra Modi's remarks into English. Brian, I'm just wondering, look, these things are always filled with praise and platitudes, but this relationship is not one that is filled with praise and platitudes. I just wonder what you make of what we saw there and what we heard there.
Two thoughts. One, there is rightly a fair amount of concern from some Canadians about this invitation, given what the Indian government is alleged to have been a part of and perhaps even supportive of. But, and you're going to see a pattern in many of my comments, Donald Trump changed everything with his threats against our sovereignty. And clearly, Mark Carney has assessed that it is a priority to rebuild links with key countries around the world where the relationship was strained. But secondly, I would say if Mark Carney can extract a commitment from the Indian government to cooperate with the investigations, that would be a major development. And I'd say if that happens, it would make the invitation worth it.
Well, Brian, you were working in Prime Minister Trudeau's office when that remarkable moment in the House of Commons happened when Justin Trudeau revealed what they were aware of. And again, Thanksgiving Monday last year when the RCMP revealed certain things. I know there are limits to what you can say, but this notion of getting cooperation, I mean, in your experience, what is your sense of how willing and likely it is to see India move in a meaningful way on that?
It's going to be a challenge, and the evidence of that is the fact that we did not experience the cooperation that was wanted since those terrible events in 2023. But with a new Prime Minister, with this invitation here, I think there is an opportunity for a fresh start, and I'm hopeful that the Prime Minister Carney can extract certain commitments.
Arif, what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, they're going to be very friendly publicly. We won't know at all or for some time on how it went specifically behind closed doors, but what do you make of what we saw there?
Well, I think what you're seeing, though, is a very different tone and a very different approach, right? It's a very mature adult exchange. And I've been in the room when, amongst leaders, you can have a very candid exchange. And I think that there is a candid exchange that can be had to address each country's concerns. We clearly have a concern that's around law and enforcement and cooperation with our investigation. They have, for decades, clearly had a concern about intelligence and counterterrorism and us taking that seriously. And then third, I think there's an element of how you address each other publicly. So certainly the first part is being tackled. I think the law enforcement and intelligence part was also tackled before with some announcement that India and Canada were going to cooperate. So I think they're on the right track. And it seems to me, watching the two leaders, it's a very different exchange. And I think it's an exchange which can be quite candid in private.
Vina, your thoughts on that, and then we're going to take a quick break.
I think this meeting is building on a successful phone call. It's building on what we're hearing from the RCMP here, that India is beginning to cooperate. So both leaders framed the meeting in terms of multilateral significance of each other, so both of G7, but also of India as a rising power. I think the discussions probably will be frank on issues of transnational repression and terrorism. I noted that Prime Minister Carney added that because that has been India's concern. So as long as this can be approached from a perspective of both countries have serious concerns, but both countries also have interest in cooperating. We need each other to be able to reduce over-reliance on the US, both for India and for Canada. That's a priority. We need each other to make our Indo-Pacific strategies a success and deal with challenges emanating from China. And ultimately, even for people-to-people ties, there are many Canadians who want the relationship with India to be improved, Indo-Canadians who have family and business ties in the country. So I think This will be not an easy situation. There will be still many challenges ahead, but this is a great start to rebuilding a relationship that has been on ice for too long.